everybody. I'm going to talk to you a little about what eating animals means for the animals themselves, but also the terrifying consequences for wildlife. But I'm starting with the perhaps most misunderstood and maligned of all species that people consume, and they consume them in vast quantities: chickens. Traditionally, people have been hoodwinked into believing meat was desirable because it was a so-called luxury food, the centerpiece of the table, surrounded by the essential but unglamorous vegetables. Yet when we strip away what luxury really means, it's just those that most could not afford. Even though this outdated attitude prevails for some, in fact today, meat is cheap. Horrendously cheap, as it's subsidised to the tune of billions of pounds across the world. Meat is the flesh of once living individuals, baby animals who did not want to die. Meat is dirty, disgusting, and the most costly of foods imaginable, coming at the expense of our home, this beautiful, incredible planet. Chicken farming is the epitome of life is cheap. Everyday whole chickens sell for just £2.50 in major supermarkets, all that suffering for £2.50. And the numbers are crazy, close to 1 billion little lives wiped out each year in the UK alone. So much cruelty on a mind-boggling scale, and so often excused by ignorance. I've heard them all. I'm sure you have too. But chickens are stupid. They don't feel. And even, are chickens animals? People celebrate the smartness of wild birds and yet dismiss chickens as being unintelligent, worthless. Scientists and those who live with hens, and I'm sure many of you do, have learned that they can be cunning and wily, and they can communicate in sophisticated ways comparable with some primates, just as the cognitive abilities of crows are equal to chimpanzees and gorillas. Roosters protect females, chickens solve complex problems, and mother hens emotionally empathize with their chicks. A detailed feature in Scientific American stated, chickens are smart, they understand their world, which raises troubling questions about how they are treated on factory farms. And researchers at Macquarie University in Australia recently found chickens' high level of intelligence made studying them somewhat of a challenge. Birds would deliberately subvert experiments to their advantage. In large outdoor spaces with lots of vegetation, an enclosed area was set up which showed TV footage of a cockerel shaking his wattle. A cockerel's wattle, that sounds rude, doesn't it? That's the fleshy bit underneath the throat, which a female finds very attractive when he shakes it because it means he's got some food for her. And the bigger the wattle, the more testosterone. Ain't that the way? Hens had to wait for the door to be opened, but one, named 007, became impatient and examined the lock mechanism closely, turning her head from side to side to examine how the lock worked, carefully plucked at the wire, absolutely accurately, which controlled the latch, opened the door, in she went, got what she wanted, to be close to the guy and the food. She never waited again, even though they changed the latch configuration several times, she always beat them. Like humans, chickens are now known to tailor their messages to their audience. So a cockerel who sees a threat overhead will make a specific alarm call if he knows a female is nearby, but he won't make that call if it's a male nearby. Males take more risks if they feel safe. It's a bit like us driving faster when we wear a seatbelt, and chickens alarm call more if they're safely under a bush. Chickens can convey specific information with particular calls, such as there's a hawk above or there's a fox nearby, and that's understood by the other birds without them actually ever seeing the threat, and they respond differently according to the language. So animal behaviourists now accept that it's like the equivalent of words. They accept chickens think before they act like large-brained mammals. Empathy used to be thought of as a human-only trait. It's now accepted mother hens feel emotional empathy for their babies. Hens are capable of distinguishing numbers, and they're logical, understanding if A is greater than B and B is greater than C, then A is greater than C. Young chicks know that an object that moves out of their sight still exists, unlike human babies who don't develop that skill until they're 1. They're also known to be able to plan ahead and exhibit self-control. The reason that I'm telling you this is because most people just dismiss chickens as if they're nothing. It's a very convenient way to think. Even if we put appeals out as Viva, the response rate will be much lower for chickens than for any other animal. Well, domestic chickens originated from the red jungle fowl. The male is magnificently handsome, and they still live wild in parts of Asia in groups of 4 to 13 in complex, fascinating social systems where alpha roosters spend a lot of time strutting their stuff, trying to impress females with providing them with food, and where the non-alpha males spend an equal amount of time trying to be deceptive and clever to attract the hens and mate with them without the bosses knowing. Naturally living in very small flocks, imagine in factory farms what these birds endure in overcrowded sheds of 30,000 birds or more, and a potential lifespan of 10 years cut short to just 6 weeks. They've been subjected to intense genetic manipulation. In the past 50 years, growth rates have increased by over 300%. They now grow so fast that at just 6 weeks old, they're obese. Countless millions of animals in pain as their baby hearts and joints struggle to cope with their adult size. Visiting a broiler shed is a sensory overload, and not in a good way. They're kept on top of their own waste for their short lives, and it's not an exaggeration to say at the end of the cycle, the sheds are carpeted in birds almost as far as your eye can see. I went to a farm near where I live, it was in Ross-on-Wye, and the white feathered birds, literally, I could not move through them to film them. And when I moved, it was like a Mexican wave going through them as they tried to get out of the way. So I just had to stay still to investigate. It's important to remember, when profit is the driving force, welfare is a distant consideration, and it's difficult to think of an industry where the pursuit of profit is more of a priority. The stories from chicken catchers of birds popping under the wheels of forklift trucks and being decapitated by sliding cages to keep up with demand are shocking, but the animal welfare concerns go much wider. Around 47 million chickens die on British factory farms before 6 weeks of age. I've seen this carnage firsthand many times. Dead and dying birds, some slowly being buried under the accumulating waste of the living. Chickens with legs so weakened that they buckle and struggle to rise from the ammonia-soaked litter, which leads to hock burns. A chicken catcher I spoke to said he watched as numerous birds died during catching as their hearts literally burst. Longevity is not a consideration on a factory farm. So some people say the answer is buy free range. They will say that free range is better for the environment. So at Viva, we've spent the last 25 years challenging myths and ignorance and overcoming arguments that, for example, Animals are here for us. They're not. They belong to no one but themselves. That humans are the most important species. We're not. The planet would do very well without us. Thank you very much. That meat and dairy are healthy. They're not. They kill us through chronic disease. That factory farming is needed to feed our world. It's not. It contributes to world hunger. And that it's ethical and better for the environment if we eat free-range or organic meat and dairy. The last one I'm going to tackle now. This year alone, there have been over 70,000 blazes in the Amazon rainforest. Farmers are encouraged by the President of Brazil to deliberately set fire to this ancient and precious wilderness. For what? To graze cattle for meat and to grow fodder, fed to cattle but also exported here and to the EU to feed pigs, poultry and yes, cattle. The Amazon produces 1/5 of the world's oxygen and is home to 1/10 of all the world's species. You would think basic self-preservation would stop this unspeakable vandalism from happening, but such is the short-termism of capitalism. The most serious impact of the environmental crisis is the loss of biodiversity, the wiping out of living beings with which we share the earth. The human impact on the planet has become increasingly damaging, and we've now reached the point where life on Earth is threatened with a type of destruction associated with sci-fi disaster films. As animal agriculture expands, the natural world shrinks, and we are now experiencing the world's 6th mass extinction. The huge loss of species is a crisis that will surpass even climate change. Just weeks ago, the United Nations major report on biodiversity was published by the Intergovernmental Panel for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services by 145 experts from over 50 countries. It assessed changes over the last 50 years and predicts scenarios for the coming decades. The UN says 1 million animal and plant species are at risk of extinction, many of those within decades. The number of species already gone extinct since 1900 land species is 1 in 5. That's 1 in 5 species gone forever. Extinction, you will hear people say it's a natural phenomenon, and it is. It occurs at a normal rate of 1 to 5 species a year, but we're now losing species up to 1,000 times that background rate, with literally dozens going extinct every single day. I've heard some people say, why does it matter? I presume they mean, why does it matter to them? It's pretty clear why it matters to the elephants, the tigers, the lions, the chimpanzees, who see their home destroyed, their food sources and shelter disappear, and their families die. For humans, it matters because biodiversity is essential to all life, including our own on this planet. Without plants, there's no oxygen. Without bees to pollinate, there'd be no fruit and nuts. Without a diversity of animals, plants and microbes, there would be a massive impact on seed dispersal, water filtration, nutrient recycling, soil generation. In other words, without biodiversity, the human race is fucked. Why has it happened? A major factor is the obsession with consuming animal flesh. As natural landscapes are ripped up to make way for fodder and to graze farmed animals, to the degree that the UN have said livestock farming is the heart of catastrophic species loss. Forests, woods, hills, wetlands, savannas, mangroves, they're all disappearing for the human appetite for meat and dairy. You may think, how can the problem possibly be so huge? So back to chickens. Today, there are 22 billion on this planet. 2 billion pigs, 1.5 billion cattle, 1.5 billion sheep, 450 million goats, 400 million turkeys. The impact of meat and dairy far exceeds that of plant foods. Meat, eggs and dairy use 83% of the world's farmland, yet only provide 18% of calories. More than 1/3 of the world's total land and 3/4 of the world's freshwater resources are now used for grazing or fodder production. If we narrow that down to just looking at agricultural land, 3/4 is used for raising animals, and the expansion is endangering 2/3 of species that are now threatened or near threatened. The United Nations state that the most damaging of all farming is beef. Yes, free range beef, followed by dairy, then pigs, then chickens. When compared to staples like potatoes, wheat, rice, the impact of beef per calorie is even more extreme, requiring 160 times more land and producing 11 times more greenhouse gases. So we're running out of land to grow food. Europe and we could be self-sufficient in food on a vegan diet, but not on a meat-centered one. Europe imports 80%, 4/5 of its animal feed. So, vegans, we require much less land, less water, less energy, less chemicals for our diet. And plants, remember, they don't need antibiotics. They don't poo, they don't wee. One recent study in 2016 showed that the vegan diet is by far the most environmentally friendly, reducing land use by 45% and greenhouse gases by 51%. So you see, whichever way we turn, it is imperative the world chooses vegan. Factory farming is disgusting, it's obscene, it's causing suffering on an unimaginable scale, as billions of souls are imprisoned their whole life and then knifed or gassed. The feed, water and energy they require, not to mention the poo they produce, 7 million pounds of excrement every minute in the USA alone. In the UK, it's 170 million tonnes a year. It's destroying our world. Farming free-range animals like beef cows is even more damaging to the planet and completely unsustainable. Turning to fish, it's not the answer, as 3/4 of the world's fish stocks are overexploited and they are collapsing. 90% of large predatory fish have now been depleted. Back to the maligned chicken. Remember, I said our society excuses the cruelty meted out to chickens based on utter ignorance, convenient ignorance, you may say. The collapse of nature is also happening partly because of ignorance, partly because of apathy, and partly because of vested interest. Eating animals is causing the collapse of our entire planet. Time is running out, but there is time to change. Politicians have failed to protect us, they've failed to protect animals, and they're failing to protect our planet. So we have to take responsibility for this role. Forget lobbying somebody else. Change ourselves and change those around us. Forget about being shy about being vegan. Go out there and be proud. Go out there, educate, campaign. is no time left for saying that we feel embarrassed or that we're different in some kind of way, because the animals are relying on us and the very survival of our home depends on you and you and you, all of us together. By being vegan and campaigning for change, it means freeing up the land ravished by animal agriculture, and it means rewilding it. I've seen this done in parts of the world, Costa Rica, India, and here in the UK. It's incredibly successful. We can do this. Whatever way suits you, whatever group you want to support, and obviously I hope it is Viva. Empower us, just act, but act now. Together we can save our world. Viva life. Thank you.